Republican presidential candidate and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley addressed her supporters on Monday and said the border deal being mulled over in the Senate is lacking in some areas and blamed former President Donald Trump for asking Congress to stop the bills until after the election. Haley is the last remaining Republican rival to Donald Trump in the primary race and has also requested U.S. Secret Service protection. The former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations was targeted in two swatting incidents, once on December 30th and the other time on January 1st. Russia has accused the US President Joe Biden of carrying out strikes in Iraq and Syria to boost his image as the presidential election campaign is heating up. Russia says the strikes were not in retaliation for a deadly attack on US soldiers. On Friday, the United States began pounding dozens of targets linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guards and allied groups. The strikes came after 3 US soldiers were killed in Jordan in an attack that Washington blames on Iranian-backed militias. At a meeting of United Nations Security Council held to discuss the strikes was requested by Moscow, which said there was no justification for the US action. Turkish Foreign Affairs Minister Hakan Fidan has confirmed an imminent visit by Russian President Vladimir Putin without announcing an exact date. Some officials and local media have mentioned February 12th as a likely date, but the office of President Erdogan hasn't confirmed it yet. The visit will mark the Russian leader's first trip to a NATO ally since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Turkey, which shares a maritime border with both Ukraine and Russia, has sought to maintain good ties with both nations since Moscow's invasion. It has provided military support to Kyiv and voiced support for its territorial integrity, but also opposes sanctions on Russia. Nearly 4 months of armed conflict between Israel and Lebanese militant outfit Hezbollah have upended life for residents on both sides of the border. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes. Many hope for a ceasefire, but the prospect for a full-blown war seems to grow. The conflict broke out shortly after Hamas's cross-border attack on October 7th, triggering Israel's offensive in the Gaza Strip. At the same time, Hezbollah jumped into the fray by launching into the Israeli territory and opening a second front of war in solidarity with Hamas. Since then, Israel and the Hezbollah have exchanged fire nearly every day, with Hezbollah launching drones, missiles, and Israel attacking with airstrikes and artillery fire. Amid the ongoing tensions in West Asia, Iran has begun the construction of its 4th homegrown nuclear reactor in Isfahan. The chief of Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, AEOI, Mohammad Eslami, said the research reactor is being constructed in Isfahan to create a powerful source of neutron for a variety of applications. Notably, Iran's nuclear program has been the subject of international criticism and backlash. But Tehran has always insisted that its efforts are entirely peaceful, denying any ambition of developing the nuclear weapons in the West Asian region. Iran aims to achieve the production capacity of 20,000 megawatts of nuclear power by the year 2041. On the other hand, Yemen's internationally recognized government named Foreign Minister Ahmed bin Mubarak as the new Prime Minister. Bin Mubarak replaces Main Abdul Malik Saeed at the time of rising tensions in the Arabian Peninsula poorest country. A spate of Red Sea attacks by Houthi rebels have prompted retaliatory strikes by the United States and the UK. Now, Bin Mubarak is seen as one of the architects of the Saudi-led coalition that intervened against Houthis in 2015 to prop up internationally recognized government. In recent remarks, Bin Mubarak called on EU to designate the Houthis as a terrorist group, and he has advocated for increased military support to government forces in the wake of the Red Sea attacks. Europe may soon have to deal with the new massive influx of migrants, and this time from Sudan. The United Nations Refugee Agency has warned that more migrants from Sudan could rush into Europe across the Mediterranean if a ceasefire agreement is not signed soon between Sudan's warring sides. Since the civil war started in the African country, more than 9 million people are believed to be internally displaced in Sudan. Around 1.5 million refugees have fled into the neighboring countries. Now, the clash is between the Sudanese military led by General Abdel Fattah Burhan and the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group commanded by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. The United Nations says at least 12,000 people have been killed in Sudan's conflict. Meanwhile, the Buckingham Palace has announced that King Charles has been diagnosed with cancer, but it did not disclose the form and type of cancer. The palace has said that King Charles will continue with his royal engagements, but he will be stepping away from public engagement for health reasons. King Charles recently underwent treatment for an enlarged prostate. According to reports, the cancer was discovered during the treatment process. The palace said King Charles remains wholly positive about his treatment and looks forward to returning to full public duty as soon as possible. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak posted on social media platform X wishing King Charles a swift and speedy recovery. North Korea's recent escalation of threats and missile tests have raised fears among South Koreans in Seoul. South Koreans are increasingly worried about the possibility of another war and believe that the US may hesitate to defend the South if Kim Jong-un has more missiles to strike. In 2022, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has moved to expand the South's combined military exercises with the United States and Japan to cope with North's evolving threats. On the other hand, Sri Lanka continues to attempt to stabilize its economy after witnessing one of the worst financial crises in decades. Colombo expects to attract around $5 billion in foreign funds in the next 2 years, once it is able to finalize the restructuring of its overseas debt, according to the island nation's finance minister, that is. Now, in March last year, the country secured a $2.9 billion bailout from the International Monetary Fund, helping to temper its inflation, increase state revenue and rebuild foreign exchange reserves. Colombo will also focus on kickstarting major infra projects suspended during the financial crisis. This includes a highway, an expansion of the main airport near Colombo, and a $2 billion light railway project with Japan. Mexico's President López Obrador proposed sweeping constitutional reforms in his address on Monday, including measures to overhaul the judiciary, electoral law, pensions. President Obrador's proposal comes just months before the 2024 presidential elections. Now, the proposed reforms are expected to shape the political debate ahead of the June presidential vote. The 20 constitutional reforms announced by López Obrador include reducing the number of lawmakers in the lower house of Congress and Senate, electing judges by direct vote, and reducing spending for political campaigns. The proposed constitutional reforms would be handed to the lower house of Congress. A day after widespread agitations, detentions and crackdown in Senegal, the Senegalese MPs yesterday voted for the election postponement bill that rescheduled voting for the presidential elections on December 15th. The bill was passed in the Assembly despite the opposition's attempt to disrupt and block proceedings. Senegalese lawmakers proposed the rescheduling of the election date to August 25th. The polls were due to be held on February 25th, but on Saturday, President Macky Sall announced an indefinite postponement. They cited conflicts over selection of candidates as reason. The President of the National Assembly announced that the lawmakers had passed the bill after several leaders of the opposition parties were forcibly removed from the chamber by police personnel. Tensions boiled over in Haiti's capital on Monday as people protested against the government of Prime Minister Ariel Henry for failing to tackle crimes. Protesters say the wave of violence in the country has made a normal life impossible for the citizens. Haiti is currently facing conflict between alliances of heavily armed gangs that are expanding their territory to rural areas, bringing sexual violence, looting, and indiscriminate killings. According to UNICEF, some 314,000 have become internally displaced amid the wave of violence. At least 3 people have been killed as a deadly Pacific storm batters California. This is the second Pineapple Express storm to sweep the West Coast in less than a week. The storm has unleashed torrential rain, triggering flooding and mudslides throughout the region. Near hurricane force winds have flooded streets and brought down trees and electrical lines. More than 600,000 homes and businesses in the state were left without power. Record downpours have raised the threat of flash floods and landslides. The National Weather Service recorded over 10 inches of rain in 24 hours in Los Angeles alone. Much more is expected before the showers are due to taper off. A South Korean court acquitted Lee Jae-yong, Samsung Electronics chairman. Jae-yong was found not guilty of accounting fraud and stock manipulation by a Seoul court. It was alleged that the 2015 merger between Samsung, C&T Transport Corporation and Kyle Industries was done with the sole purpose of cementing Jae-yong's control over the Samsung Group. Prosecutors had asked for a 5-year jail term for Lee Jae-yong. Lee denied wrongdoing, arguing that he and other executives acted on the belief the merger would benefit the shareholders. The sentence prevents a return to jail for Jae-yong, who was convicted in 2017 for bribing a friend of former President Park Geun-hye. Meanwhile, Meta's oversight board has determined that a video on Facebook which falsely suggests that US President Joe Biden is a pedophile does not violate the company's current rules. The board, which operates independently but is funded by Meta, took on the Biden video case in October in response to a user complaint about an altered 7-second video of the president posted on Facebook. The social media giant opted not to remove the video. In the unaltered footage, Biden's deep fake was seen placing an "I voted" sticker on his granddaughter's chest. The oversight board declared that Meta's content policy is too narrowly focused on AI-generated material and lacks a clear rationale. Amber Pearson's entire life was ruled by obsessive compulsive disorder, commonly known as OCD. It's a disorder in which people have recurring unwanted thoughts, ideas, or sensations that make them feel driven to do something repetitively. Amber used to wash her hands until they bled. Well, she did that maniacally, checked windows to make sure they were closed, and ate alone for the fear of contamination. A revolutionary brain implant has been used to treat both her epilepsy and her OCD. Amber's doctors have planted a 32mm long device to treat her debilitating epileptic seizures, confident it would be able to detect the activity that causes these episodes and deliver a pulse to interfere with them. Goldman Sachs analysts reiterated their bullish stance on Nvidia and raised the 12-month target price to $800, which implies a nearly 21% upside from Nvidia's Friday closing price. Goldman said it revised forecasts, taking into account recent indicators of strong demand for AI servers and a better supply situation for GPUs. The brokerage firm added that the move was also driven by continued spending on Gen AI infrastructure by the large cloud service providers, a broadening customer profile, and multiple new product cycles that could imply long-term diversified growth for the chip maker. The US dollar was perched near a 3-month peak, buoyed by elevated Treasury yields. Treasury yields are up on growing expectations that the Federal Reserve is unlikely to cut interest rates aggressively this year. The dollar index, which measures the US currency against 6 rivals, is up 3% for the year so far, after dropping 2% in 2023. A string of robust US economic data has quashed any lingering hope of early and steep interest rate cuts by the Fed, with Fed Chair Jerome Powell and other policymakers also pushing back against the notion. Australian retail sales rose significantly in the fourth quarter of 2023, aided by increased discounts during the holiday season. Although overall retail turnover during the quarter remained close to 3-year lows. Retail sales grew 0.3% quarter-on-quarter in the 3 months to December 31st. November's reading was boosted chiefly by the Black Friday event and was a bright spot in an otherwise subdued year for retail spending. Australian retail sales slowed drastically through 2023 as the effects of high interest rates were baked into the economy. Higher rates factored heavily into increased mortgage and housing costs, thus reducing the appeal for discretionary spending among the domestic population. Japan's real wages fell for a 21st straight month, though at a slower pace, while household spending dropped for a 10th consecutive month, showing that inflation outpaced wage recovery and continued to weigh on consumer spending. Japan's wage trend, along with inflation, is closely watched, with the Bank of Japan Regarding both indicators, among the key data to consider in preparation for phasing out its massive stimulus policy. Experts suggest Japan needs price increases to be propelled by demand and higher pay, instead of the cost-push inflation led by energy prices and a weak yen. Prices of goods in the Philippines accelerated at a slower pace for the fourth straight month in January as food prices continued to stabilize. The Philippine Statistics Authority reported that inflation rate in January eased further to 2.8%, which is well within the government's target range of 2% to 4%. The latest figure is lower than the 3.9% posted in December of 2023 and the 8.7% recorded in January of 2023. However, concerns remain as gasoline and diesel prices went up for the fifth straight week in the Asian economy. Oil prices were mostly unchanged in early trading today as market participants assessed a visit by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to the West Asian region. The visit is aimed at discussing a ceasefire offer in Gaza. But ahead of those discussions, Blinken met Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler on the previous day in an effort to ensure global energy stability. But traders do not see oil-producing nations in the region increasing their supplies. Remember, the demand forecast for oil and gas in 2024 remains low.